22% of Brits think immigration levels should remain where they are. 69% think that most illegal immigrants do not share the same values. So, yeah, I mean, when was that? Was it Newsnight? This was forever ago that Newsnight did a phone-in survey, a text-in survey or something, and it was how many people think that multiculturalism has failed. And this must have been at least 5 years ago. It was like 89% of respondents thought that multiculturalism had failed. And I have to assume that if you did the same thing again, that did seem kind of high to me at the time. Okay.
It might seem kind of low nowadays. Yeah. And look, again, I think it's important to delve into the nuance of it, because a lot of people who haven't looked into this properly, what they think multiculturalism means is like black people and brown people being in the country.
Correct.
That's not multiculturalism. That's a multi-ethnic society, which can work. Absolutely can work. Multiculturalism is the idea that actually there's no such thing as British culture. There's no such thing as British identity. There's no such thing as British values. And what we really need to do is just bring people from all over the world and say, oh, you want to practice your religion, your culture, your this? That's great. Everybody live in their own ghetto, and we're all living this beautiful multicultural utopia, and diversity is our greatest strength.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity is not a strength.
Why?
Because I remember this great scene from Game of Thrones. Have you seen Game of Thrones? Do you remember when Cersei and King Robert, they're discussing the potential Dothraki invasion?
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, yeah, but we've got 5 times as many. We've got 5 kingdoms. They've got just the one. And he goes, what's a bigger number, 5 or 1? And she goes, 5. And he goes, 5, 1. Right. Unity is a strength when you're attempting to do things. Common purpose, common values, a sense of shared identity. These are things that allow you to overcome difficulties. One of the reasons the concern about immigration is as high as it is not just the levels of immigration, it's also the fact that Britain has become poorer. Our GDP per capita is lower today than it was in 2008. In other words, people's living standards are being eroded for reasons we can get into. So addressing that requires quite a lot of difficult challenges. We've got a bloated welfare sector, so you're going to have to deal with the fact that far too many people are not working and being paid not to work. You're going to have to deal with the national debt, which is way too high, the deficit. You've got like big challenges, right? And those challenges are quite easy to overcome, comparatively speaking, when we all feel like we are ultimately, at the end of the day, this is our country and we're going to sort it out. But if we have become multicultural in that everyone really only cares, we keep hearing from politicians, we need to look at the concerns of the British XYZ community, British Jewish community, British Muslim community, British Pakistani community, British Hindu, all of this stuff, right? Then we're no longer British people trying to sort the same thing out. We're people who are looking out for our own community. Our own community is Britain. That's what we should be looking out for. So diversity can be a strength in one sense, which is when you bring in people of talent and drive and ambition from around the world, and they all buy into the values of that place and then pull together in one direction. That's a strength. Just bringing lots of people from around the world and then not integrating them and not encouraging them to become British, and also bringing people who are probably not easily integratable into our society. That's not a strength, that's a weakness. So that's a big part of the problem that we have, is multiculturalism is essentially an ideology of divisiveness and disparity instead of an ideology of cohesion and unity. And if you want to solve problems, like you've got a big team working on your show, we've got a team working on our show. Imagine you just had 15 people working for you who all had the exact opposite ideas to each other of what's right and wrong, what direction the show should be moving in, who should be presenting the show, etc., etc. That would never work. So diversity is a strength in that you've got some variance of opinion. You don't have only one opinion about things, but there's a limit to everything. And we've gone way past that limit. So multi-ethnic society is fine. No one's got a problem with people with different skin colors per se. The problem is ideology and worldview, and those have to be aligned for people to be able to work together well.
Are Britain's core values at risk of disappearing? Is that a real concern?
Well, what I would say is Britain's core values are actually kind of become quite impossible to define in public. So that to me seems like a problem. I keep every guest we have on trigonometry, I'm like, what are British values? And I don't blame them, because I'm not sitting here with like a coherent vision of what it means to be British. But one of those things, and it's interesting because this is what you asked about, is you talk about people's concern about illegal immigration, 69%, whatever, and they're not compatible with British values. Well, as you well know, one of I would say probably the core British value is a sense of fairness and orderliness. And which has manifested itself in the idea of queuing properly.
Love a queue.
Love a queue.
Yep.
And Britain, and it's like a hack joke that everybody does about Britain. British people love queuing, blah, 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 blah. But if you think about what queuing is fundamentally, queuing is civilization. Queuing is civilization. It's a process by which we go from the law of the jungle, who's got the sharpest elbows, who is going to get to the front of that line by being the biggest, strongest, roughest, most violent, etc. And it's a way of saying we're actually going to have a civilized society. We're going to do things in order. We're going to respect each other. We're going to be tolerant of each other. And by the way, in that process of spending time together, waiting collectively for something, we can all talk about how terrible it is. And through that, we actually bond and connect, and we kind of connect with the people around us. So illegal immigration is fundamentally antithetical to what it means to be British, because it's about respecting the law and it's about fairness. And
as opposed to jumping the queue.
As opposed to jumping queue. And I'll give you an example. My mother applied for a visa to come here 2 or 3 years ago to spend time with me and my family, right? And despite, I don't know, maybe there was something imperfect about her application. My mother's been to the UK dozens of times. She's got plenty of things to do back home. She's no intention of staying and working in the Uber Eats economy, I assure you, right? Her application was denied. And I'm having to spend quite a lot of time and money to get that sorted so that she can come, while at the same time tens of thousands of people are getting on a boat in France and coming here illegally. I just don't think that's where the British people think the system should be at.
How does being an immigrant shape your views on immigration?
I just think I don't have the political correctness BS approach to it. So I can be honest and say, I think some immigration's good. If it's carefully selective, and if we're bringing people who have the potential to contribute, I'm just not constrained by this, because no one can accuse me of hating immigrants, right? So then I don't have to deal with that before I say my actual opinion.
It's a very slippery argument, because it goes from you're exclusionary, you don't know what you've got, you've never needed to go through this, to you've pulled the ladder up after you.
Yeah.
It just continues to sort of move down the predictable stack.
Yeah, but the other thing about it is that every immigrant will tell you, some of them will tell you this in private rather than in public, but like, I know the Russian society, there's some amazing people in Russia and in Ukraine and all of Eastern Europe, talented, creative, driven, ambitious, really, really resilient in ways that are hard for people actually in the West to even comprehend. Really brilliant people. But there are also some awful people in Russia. Now, if we are going to allow people to come from that country or any other country, which of those groups of people do we want, right? Like, we'd all acknowledge that every country has within it the types of people that you'd want more of and the types of people you might want less of if you wanted a cohesive, dynamic society. So I can say, without being called a bigot, I do not want the dregs of Russia's society, or the dregs of Ukrainian society, or the dregs of Armenian society, or the dregs of the Pakistani society in our country. But I do want some of the best people who might want to come from all of those countries to come here and contribute.
And I suppose the less desirable that you make the country, the less likely it is to get those upper echelons of the people that you really do want to come in.
And that's the great tragedy of where Britain has got to. And I think we talked about this last time, where when we talk about net figures on immigration, what that conceals is you're getting a lot of people from, let's be charitable and say, the bottom end of the jobs market. Many of them might not be working at all. And you are losing all the people who'd actually want to live in a nice country, because they go, well, why would I come here, pay 50% tax, be unsafe, and watch a country deteriorate where I could go somewhere else? So if you want a good immigration policy, you have to not welcome the worst people from around the world, and you have to create the conditions that attract the best people from around the world. That's what you want.
It's kind of a morphing argument, economic implications for supporting people, the cultural absorption and integration of them, the concerns that British people have for their quality of life outside of that, this brain drain thing that's happening, what does this mean overall in terms of trajectory? And at each one of these points, there is 5 or 10 accusations of bigotry that can be thrown at you, which you need to sort of wipe off all of the slime and go, okay, it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that. I'm actually trying to say something which hopefully real people would actually be really, really concerned about. And then again, not to use Ryland Clark as, the light bringer of all of this sort of issues, you can say the most milquetoast thing in the world and still get castigated and destroyed for it.
I also think, though, that is a very kind of what we call Westminster bubble type of thing. Like this argument does not wash even remotely in the majority.
People in Newcastle are too concerned about Ryland Clark.
I think we've got to the point now where you just, like I said, that lid is not going to go back on the pressure cooker unless you really try and force it, in which case you're going to get serious disorder in the streets.
Is the UK doing enough to culturally assimilate immigrants? Should it be doing more? Is there such a thing as that?
I actually think we should be doing a hell of a lot more, and historically speaking especially, but that requires us to not have all of this conversation about...
to identify that there is a difference, because if you deny that there's a difference, then assimilation isn't needed.
How can you... are you saying cultures are different?
Yeah. Well, if diversity is our strength, and there is no such thing as a British culture, then assimilation doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
No. The job is to have this pick and mix of things that are all disparate and separate inside. It's not to have a bag of different colored sand that you turn over to turn into like a mostly the current color with a little bit of new color in it. That's, yeah.
Well, if you think about the insistence on assimilation or integration, right, it presupposed within that is that there's a difference between cultures, which is something that we pretend isn't true. And then it also implied within that is that there's a difference, there's a superiority of one culture over another. One culture is better than another, for this country at least, right? Now, I'm not saying people in Afghanistan need to adopt British culture. That's up to them. But for our country, people should be adopting British culture, which means that we are implicitly making the claim that it is better. And you can't say that.
And even if you've had this challenge of asking your guests on your show, what is British culture? If you struggle to identify it, it's going to be very hard to enforce it, encourage it, provide a roadmap for people to assimilate into it. It's this Ouroboros of non-culturalism.
If we lifted the cultural restrictions on actually talking about these things, I believe we would get to an answer very quickly on what British culture actually is. And I'm not saying I have all of those answers, but if we had a conversation as a country about then we'd get there. The problem is we've got to a point where people are ashamed, frankly, and embarrassed to actually talk about what that might be. And there's a lot of discussion to be had about it. I certainly wouldn't pretend, particularly as an immigrant myself, to have every single part of it. But I think fairness and orderliness and the sense of respect for each other is a big, big part of it. And a lot of people in Britain and the West more broadly don't realize how unusual that is. So one of the things Francis and I always talk about on trigonometry when him and I are just doing a conversation, like his background in Venezuela and my background in Russia teaches me that it's not actually that normal. Like in Russia and Venezuela, we discovered this just talking, is like if you screw someone over that has allowed themselves to be screwed over, the general consensus is, well, they're the dickhead. They let themselves get screwed over, and you're right to screw them over, of course. We even have this phrase in Russian, which is «что-то плохо лежит», which means that something is lying in the wrong way. Like if you left your phone in the wrong place and someone took it, that it was not lying in the right way, as in you left it there. Of course someone's going to steal it, right? So not everywhere in the world has these cultures. I mean, if you go to Japan, right, you discover that cultures are very different when it comes to these things. Like if you can leave valuables on a table, they're not going to go anywhere. And so there's lots of conversations to be had about what it means to be British, whether it's our attitudes to women, relations, all sorts of things that are an important part of it. Speaking English is going to be a very important part of it.
Yeah, is that not the most basic approach to this?
Well, you can't connect with other people unless you speak the same language, basically. So all of these things should be hashed out, and we should be very muscular about forcing people who are already here to comply with those basic requirements.
Just rolling the clock forward a little bit, I have to assume that if you have an ever-increasing number of migrants coming across the channel that don't speak the English language, eventually they're going to have children, and those children are going to need educating, and those children will only speak the language of their parents if they're not doing the cultural assimilation thing. So we're going to end up with schools, or the requirement for schools, that are going to be in different language, an increasing number of different languages in and around these areas.
Because diversity is our strength, right? So we can't say to them,
need to learn English.
Yeah.
Your kids should learn English.
And look, the children of, or even of illegal immigrants, do tend to assimilate and pick up the language. Kids are very good at that. But there are schools in this country where English is not the most common language already. So yeah, all of these things just need to be forced to be, everything in our country has to be angled towards cohesiveness and cohesion. Because we've been angling towards disparity and difference for far too long.